Miss Sophia's third-grade classroom was a chaos of colors and sounds. For most children, it was a vibrant learning environment. For 8-year-old Alex, it was a storm. The hum of the fluorescent lights pierced his ears. The chalk scratching the blackboard sounded like a scream, and the smell of snacks mixed with perfume made him nauseous. He sat in the back, a silent agreement to be less visible, focused on his only anchor, 3 erasers that he lined up in perfect sequence. As Ms. Sophia, her patience wearing thin, asked for silence for the 5th time, she decided to praise Victor's project, the most popular student in the class. It was at that moment that a voice no one had heard in months, hoarse from lack of use, cut through the air. The teacher isn't wearing her wedding ring today. The silence that followed was absolute, dense, a vacuum that even the teacher couldn't impose. All eyes, shocked, turned to her bare hand, and then to the invisible boy at the back of the room. How? Did he notice that? Hello? Which city or country are you watching us from right now? We want to know how far our stories reach. If you want to understand how this seemingly random observation was the trigger that exposed secrets and changed the lives of everyone in that room forever, stay here and subscribe to the channel, because stories like Alex's deserve to be heard, and you won't want to miss any details of what happened next. Alex's story doesn't begin in that classroom. It begins in the silence of a baby's room where Clara, his mother, spent sleepless nights. The love she felt was fierce, a protective instinct that hurt in her chest, but it was accompanied by overwhelming loneliness. She remembered an afternoon at the playground. The other mothers laughed and exchanged tips on tantrums. Clara was a few feet away, sitting in the sand, watching Alex run his fingers repeatedly over the cold chain of a swing, completely absorbed. A mother approached and said sympathetically, "He's so quiet, isn't he?" Clara just smiled, a smile that hid her urge to scream. At home, life was a complex choreography. Everything had a place, a sound, a texture. The labels on all of Alex's clothes were cut off. The food on his plate couldn't touch each other. The noise of the blender required advance warning and headphones for him. To the world, they were quirks. To Clara, it was the language of love, but it was a lonely job. Daniel, her husband, loved his son. There was no doubt about that, but his love was impatient and stubborn. He saw a boy who needed to face the world. The arguments were always the same, whispered at night. "He needs friends, Clara. He needs to play ball." And she would reply, exhausted, "He has friends. The patterns on the carpet are his friends. Why isn't that enough?" The greatest pain was the absence of her own identity. She was no longer Clara, the architect. She was Alex's mother. In her effort to make the whole world see her son, Clara had become completely invisible. Before acceptance came despair, and despair is a lucrative market. Clara and Daniel dove headfirst into a maze of miracle cures and unsolicited advice. The first wave came from family, with opinions that sounded like judgments. "He needs boundaries." In my day, a spanking would have solved that. Each word was a stab in Clara's heart. Then came the experts. The first suggested a radical diet that eliminated gluten, lactose, and sugar. The only result was a thinner, more irritable son and an emptier bank account. Hope turned to frustration. The most painful attempt was with a behavioral therapist who promised to integrate Alex. Her method was to force eye contact. Clara watched from a side room through a one-way mirror. She saw her son's body stiffen, saw panic take over his eyes before he collapsed into the most anguished cry she had ever heard. That day, she pulled him out of the room in the middle of the session and never went back, feeling that she had betrayed him by handing him over to someone who saw his nature as a defect. That night, the argument with Daniel was the worst yet. The rift between them, which had previously been thin, became a chasm. The most complex battlefield was not the clinic but the dinner table. There the conflict was between two forms of love and fear. Daniel was not a villain. He was a father terrified of a future he did not understand. The tension exploded one night when the school called. Alex refused to participate in physical education class because the grass was wet and he couldn't stand the feeling on his shoes. Daniel came home furious. "I can't believe it, Clara. All boys love to get dirty. What's wrong with him? What am I going to tell my colleagues?" Clara, who had spent the afternoon calming her son down from sensory overload, felt something break. "There's nothing wrong with him, Daniel," she replied, her voice trembling with anger. There's something wrong with a world that thinks all boys need to love wet grass. He's not a broken version of you, he's a perfect version of himself. At school, the conflict was more subtle. Teacher Sophia, overwhelmed with 30 students, saw Alex as a management problem. His movements were distracting, his silence defiant. She treated him with a professional pity that barely concealed her frustration. Society echoed these conflicts, with disapproving looks at the supermarket and intrusive questions at the doctor's office. There were no clear villains, just ordinary people trapped in their limitations. And at the center of it all was Alex, a boy who didn't ask to be fixed, just to be allowed to exist. The change didn't come with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. It happened the afternoon after Alex's revelation about the wedding ring. The phrase echoed in Sophia's mind all night long. She had, in fact, fought with her husband and taken off her ring. How did that boy, who never looked anyone in the face, notice such a tiny detail? The realization hit her like a wave. Alex wasn't inattentive. He was the opposite. He saw the world with a clarity she couldn't even imagine. The next day, for the first time, Sophia looked at him with curiosity. At the end of the day, she did something she had never done before. She called Clara. Clara's stomach tightened, expecting the usual complaint. But Sophia's voice was different. "Mrs. Rossi," she began hesitantly, "I'm calling to ask, what does Alex see when he looks at things? What does he love?" On the other end of the line, the silence was broken by a stifled sob. It was Clara, crying with relief. For the first time, someone wasn't asking, "What's wrong with him?" but "Who is he?" That simple question was the key. The next day, Sophia created a peace zone in the classroom and started using visual aids. The help didn't come from a specialist, but from a teacher who decided to stop teaching and start observing. The victories that followed were not grandiose. They were small moments, almost imperceptible to the world, but gigantic for the family. The first was a drawing. In art class, Alex took a sheet of paper and drew a city from above, with shocking architectural precision. At the end, he drew a red dot on a window. When Sophia asked him what it was, he didn't answer, but pointed to the ladybug brooch she wore on her coat. He had included her in his world. The second victory happened at home. Daniel arrived and found Clara and Alex on the floor, building towers with books organized by color. There was a piece that Daniel had never witnessed before. Alex picked up a blue book, crawled over to his father, and placed it in his shoe. Daniel was speechless. "He's including you," Clara explained softly. "Blue is your color. It's the color of your car." At that moment, Daniel's wall of denial began to crack. He sat down with them, and for the first time, just participated. The biggest victory came when Clara knocked over a glass jar in the kitchen. The noise was deafening. She cringed, waiting for Alex's meltdown. Instead, she heard little footsteps. Alex appeared at the door, headphones in hand. He looked at the broken pieces, at his mother's frightened face, and handed her the headphones. And then he said clearly, "Mommy, noise." It wasn't "I love you," but it was an act of care in the midst of chaos. At that moment, Clara felt the most complete victory of her life. With small victories came clarity. Clara looked back and realized she had been fighting the wrong war. It wasn't about forcing Alex to fit into the puzzle of the world, but about fighting for the world to appreciate the beauty of the piece that he was. His no to wet grass wasn't stubbornness, it was self-awareness. His refusal to look into her eyes wasn't disrespect, it was a way of filtering out the excess so he could focus on what was important. She allowed herself to mourn the son she imagined she would have, so that she could then fully embrace the son she had. And the real Alex was infinitely more fascinating. He taught her to listen to silence, to find meaning in a gesture, to see beauty in a pattern of erasers. He forced her to rebuild her world on a stronger foundation, that of unconditional love, free of expectations. In the process of fully accepting him, Clara finally began to rediscover herself, realizing that her son was the most complex and wonderful work of art she had ever known. Life did not become a fairy tale. The pain did not disappear. There are days when the world is still too noisy. The big change was not in Alex, but in the tools the family acquired to navigate their reality. The scene is now different. It is a Saturday afternoon, and the house is comfortably peaceful. Alex builds with his blocks on the floor. Clara reads beside him, not watching him, but sharing the space. Daniel enters and, instead of trying to change the game, sits down and begins to build his own tower, silently. Teacher Sophia has become an ally, a partner in building bridges between Alex's universe and the world. Their journey continues, with its challenges. But now, they don't face it as a broken family. They face it as a unit, strengthened by understanding. Hope no longer lies in a miracle cure, but in the certainty that they can build a happy and authentic life. And in that truth, they have found a deeper and more resilient form of love than they ever imagined. Not all love speaks, but all true love listens. Alex's story teaches us that sometimes the most important voices are those that don't use words. They speak through patterns, gestures, a look that sees what no one else can see. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think or feel, please like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction helps this message reach further. Someone, somewhere, may need to hear this today and know that they are not alone.